Yeah, I guess this question for Sarah. I was sort of surprised when you said that most teenagers are sort of emo and they aren't responding to these sort of gung-ho female role models. Do you think these sort of larger-than-life female role models are sort of political correctness gone crazy in movies or something, or is there something fundamental? Why don't women especially react to those sort of the way boys react to strong role models in movies?
Right. No, I think definitely the Hermione Grangers and the Katniss Everdeens are great characters, and I think young women and girls do want to see powerful characters like that. I think my point was that there should be more options, that the Bella Swans, that there is a validity to showing characters who are more passive and emotional and a bit more feminine and an introverted personality, that I think it's valid to show, a larger variety of female characters. Just like you have a large variety of different kinds of male characters in storytelling. So I don't think it's that, I'll take a Hermione Granger over Bella Swan any day. When I was young, I was a huge fan of She-Ra, the Princess of Power. So I think that's definitely, you want to see those powerful role models. But you can also get into, the almost having a negative connotation to more stereotypically feminine characteristics, like being nurturing and showing emotion and being more diplomatic. Those are typically seen as more feminine characteristics versus being, masculine, being aggressive and, competitive and shying away from showing emotions. I think it's all about variety,
Hello. I have a couple of questions. First one's for Jeff. The whole talk about numerology, one of the things that it struck me was that it seemed very familiar to the sorts of tricks that I would do in sort of grade school math to try and figure out number sequence problems. And I'm wondering if, given the talk that was happening earlier around getting people interested in science education and other sort of, math as another example of something that people aren't typically interested in, is that something that is helpful or hindering to getting people interested in learning more about math, having, people talking about numerology?
So the question was, some of the things I was talking about, what looked like number sequence patterns that we try to figure out. So I think the difference is that in my professional life, I do this all the time. I look for patterns. But that's exactly what scientists do also. A lot of astrophysics consists of sitting at the terminal and looking at patterns in the data that you see and trying to identify, a new type of galaxy, or trying to understand thermal distribution in gas clouds, things like that. A lot of that is looking for patterns. The difference, there's a subtle difference between that and the kind of numerological examples I was giving, and that is, ultimately, the goal is to produce a theory, a general, relatively simple to state account of what's true in the mathematical world or what's true in the physical world that you can then test. Whereas the goal in a lot of these numerology is to verify a previously held belief, that the Great Pyramid has encoded in the Bible. And, if you're a number theorist and you make some claim about all integers, and it holds for the first 10 million, and then suddenly it fails for the 10 million and one, you don't say, oh, well, we'll just throw that one out because that didn't quite fit our theory. There's a harder test you can do. You have to be more rigorous, and you're also looking for a kind of more encompassing explanation than I think is true in a lot of numerology. Yeah, and you look for alternative explanations in science too. That's another really important. So when you collect data in science, you have a hypothesis, but then you're your own worst critic. You say, is there anything else that could account for what we're seeing? We're getting this weird signal from space. Is it really aliens, or are there terrestrial sources that could account for that? We have to rule that out. And you look at the history of quasars. It's exactly what they did. Was that they said this seems really odd. We have to figure what other things could explain what we're hearing. Let's try to rule those out.
Okay, thanks. My second question is for Sara. Sorry, I couldn't combine them into a super question. Around female role models in literature and in comic books especially. I know that, as you mentioned, there's a stronger female presence in manga in Japan. Do you think there's any likelihood that will cross over to more American comic books? And if so, how?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would certainly hope so. That is one of the reasons why I do love manga compared to traditional American comic books. I'm not sure how or if it will happen. And I mean, I look at Avengers and, see at the very least the writing was the female Avenger, what's her name? Scarlett Johansson. At least she wasn't the girlfriend. They didn't make her into anyone's love interest, but I think that that was a positive thing. I don't think it passed I forget the name of the test, but it's pardon? Yes, the Bechdel. Yeah. Where a movie, does it have more than one named female character? Do they talk to each other, and do they talk to each other about anything other than a man? I don't know. I know it had a couple named female characters. I don't know if they talked to each other and what they talked about. But there was at least positive that, usually a female heroine's turned into some sort of love interest. Like, disappointingly, in the Star Trek reboot, apparently they had to make Uhura into a girlfriend character for Spock. I guess sometimes that has to do with you.
Uhura was Spock's girlfriend?
Spoiler alert! I mean, spoiler alert! the young Spock. Yeah. That came out in 2009, so I think the spoiler alert is expired on that. But often it has to do with, and this is horrible too. It's called the case of the not gays. You have a bunch of men together like the Avengers, and for some reason, film executives think, well, we have to give, there's these group of men working together. We have to throw in a woman to one of them to, it's called the case of the not gays. And it's a horrible, film thing they always throw in. So at least that wasn't in Avengers. They didn't turn any of the girl characters into, a solution to that non-problem. But again, I mean, as far as comic books, it is coming into the film industry, and Comic-Con is more mainstream now. But again, it seems to be mostly the traditional American comic book scene. I don't see a lot of anime getting turned into, I mean, there is Akira coming up, but Akira, that I don't recall any sort of female strong characters in Akira or focus to that. So, but it is kind of promising. I know Twilight is not a quality series, but it is drawing more attention to the people who want to make money, that there are female fandoms, right? So that's at least a positive thing, that they're realizing that, yeah, women and young girls read books, and, but Twilight is, fantasy action, and you have Hunger Games with focusing on a strong female character. So I think there is, hope for the people behind backing, major films up, that, there's a desire to see that sort of thing. And I think to remember that it's also beneficial for boys and men to be exposed to strong women characters. And by strong, I mean not just physically and, in a power sense, but strong as in that the character is a focus, their story is told. So.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my question is for Jeff. And you answered about 3/4 of it in the last answer, so I'm going to shift it slightly, and I want to ask, how can you how does one debunk numerology, as you alluded to in one of the papers that did that, and how do you tell the difference between sham numerology and an actual genuine interesting correlation between pure number theory and nature? And the example that comes immediately to mind is the golden ratio, which springs up again and again in purely non-mathematical, in physical constructs that we see growing in nature.
Okay, so the question was, how do you distinguish between sham numerology and the real thing? So,
real numerology is not quite where I was going.
Well, we don't like to call it numerology. We call it number theory. But in pseudoscience, the philosophers like to refer to this as the demarcation problem, and we heard this before today, right? We heard about the distinction between pseudoscience and science, and science and not science, perhaps. Philosophers like to make a big deal of this, but to me, this is really pointless. It's entirely a waste of time to try to find what mathematicians would call necessary and sufficient conditions to say this is pseudoscience, this is science, or this is numerology, this is real mathematics. It's the same as a chair. I don't understand why philosophers don't talk about the demarcation problem for chairs, because, is a sofa a chair? How about a love seat? Is that a chair? Suppose the chair is 50 feet tall and I'm using it as a barn. Is it a chair? So there's always going to be boundary cases as to whether someone's doing numerology or whether they're doing something real. And I think this is especially true in physics. So there's a whole lot of games people like to play where they take the fundamental constants of nature and they try to explain them somehow. And one of the really common ways to do this is take fundamental constants, unitless, dimensionless constants, like the fine structure constant, and say, okay, that's, e squared over pi minus root 2, and here's my physical explanation for it. Now, to me, this seems very likely to be doomed to failure, because I don't see that the physical constants of nature are linked at all to what we think of as mathematical constants. These seem to me to be much more likely to be more or less randomly occurring natural constants that, perhaps in our universe they're good and other universes they're not so good. It just doesn't seem very likely to me. But I could be wrong, right? Suppose somebody comes along and says, okay, I can now explain the fine structure constant. It's actually this number, and here's my physical theory to explain that. Well, then at least in principle, we could try to verify that theory, right? We could carry out some experiment to calculate more digits of the fine structure constant. If they agreed, that would be regarded as confirming evidence. So I don't think it's so easy, but I think in the bottom line is that our theories must match reality, and that's the bottom line. I don't think my view of scientific theories is that they are purely descriptive. They are not prescriptive. They are attempts to model the world. Some models are better than others, and that's the bottom line. In terms of statistical tests, like the Bible codes, what the people like Brendan Mackay tried to do is try to find, for example, similar codes in the text of Moby Dick. And what he found was that, you can find those rabbis' names in Moby Dick. Now, maybe Herman Melville was, a secret member of the tribe, but it just seems really unlikely. So I think that's another way to try to debunk this, is show that the same kind of patterns you're finding in your special text can be found elsewhere.
So I believe almost every example you cited of numerology was in base 10, and you also mentioned that a great way of identifying those problems is, does the pattern rely on the base? So on the flip side, is taking some assertion or concept and just switching bases and seeing if it holds a very good way of testing for that? And on the flip side, are there certain aspects of number theory that are specific to a base, or are they always global across any base?
Yeah, so let me answer the second one first. Are there aspects of number theory that are specific to a base? Yes, there are. The number theorist G.H. Hardy, in his book A Mathematician's Apology, said that this is kind of bad mathematics, that mathematics that depends on the property of a particular base is not particularly interesting. And he gave that as a specific example of the difference between good mathematics and bad mathematics. Now, it so happens that the kind of stuff that I'm doing lately is in fact base dependent, so maybe Hardy wouldn't approve of what I do. But the main thing is that whenever we're thinking about numbers, if they depend on the year, if your numerological coincidence depends on the year, then you remember that our current numbering system for years is purely a historical artifact based on the supposed birth of some supposed savior approximately 2,000 years ago, that our temperature system is based purely on some artificial construct about 0 being freezing and 100 being boiling and so forth, that one has to look at where these numbers come from and say, well, do they have some inherent meaning, or is it just a feature of the fact that we measure in astronomical units, for example? Or is it that we're only, we're measuring in Fahrenheit? That makes it much less likely to be true, whatever it is that you're finding. I hope I answered your question.
I have a quick question myself here. This morning, this TV show was mentioned, and Eugenie Scott's head very gradually and slowly hit the desk. So your opinions on the Big Bang Theory, please.
I have enjoyed the show. I've enjoyed seeing it progress where the female characters sort of solidified and the main character, Penny, sort of grew, I think, in a positive direction. And you do have a group of female so-called nerds or scientists and mingling with a non-scientist and having discussions together. I think that's, a positive thing. I think the fact of sort of promoting being a nerd as, again, it's, with the Bella Swan, she's not a good role model, but I think there's a good thing in, its success, perhaps encouraging more stories that focus on sort of a better version of that kind of girl, a girl where a lot of teenagers identify with that kind of person. I think, again, it's a story, a series that focuses on a set of characters that you don't normally have in the leading roles. So, you can make criticisms about, how fandom and nerdy science things are portrayed. You can't make criticisms of those characters, but I think the simple fact that they are the leads, I think is a positive thing. And having a successful show like that can encourage other producers to be like, well, we can have a successful show showing, not the jocks, but the science characters and the nerd characters and people who enjoy fandom. So I think the show from that perspective as standing out as an example of showing characters who are usually, pushed to the side to be used, when the heroes need science to come to the rescue. I think that's a positive thing about the show, that it's giving us, it's exposing people to characters who might not otherwise be the leading roles.
So I guess I'm not as negative about the show as many people are. I think it's funny. I mean, I don't think we should invest too much meaning in a show which is designed to be a comedy. I mean, it's about a humor in a setting that we don't typically see. I remember there was one scene that a friend of mine who's a research mathematician put up on his Facebook page as saying, this is the most accurate depiction of what it looks like to be a research mathematician or physicist that he ever saw. I don't know if you remember it. It was just about 30 seconds or so of two of the characters standing at a blackboard trying to solve an equation. And they're staring at it, and you see them, and 10 seconds later, you see like an hour went by, and they switch positions, but everything is still the same. And then another hour goes by, and now they're going like this, and everything is still the same. I mean, that's how it is. The mathematician Julia Robinson was once asked to report how did she spend her day, and she typed the following report and submitted it. She said, Monday, tried to prove theorem. Tuesday, tried to prove theorem. Wednesday, tried to prove theorem. Thursday, tried to prove theorem. Friday, theorem false. So, I mean, sure, the show's not perfect. I think Jim Parsons, one of the leads, is an incredibly gifted physical actor. I love to watch him, and I don't think we should read too much in it. It's a comedy. It's meant to be laughed at.
Got a question. Maybe wondered if you could comment on what I'll call counterfiction, as an example of things to, I guess, subvert messages in popular fiction. And one I can think of is Wicked, and how it sort of turns the story around on the Wicked Witch of the West. And I was thinking, for example, I'd love to see, again, Lord of the Rings told from the orc's point of view, or maybe even an orcess's point of view, and how you could totally change the story that way.
Yeah, I forget the name of the writer who introduced me to this concept of like, and there might even be someone writing, I'm sure there must be, writing from Sauron's point of view. And I mean, that really interested me, the points that were made about, it's this piece of what could be called technology, the ring, that gives anyone power. You don't have to be born a wizard or an elf, or a king to use it. And that's a secular humanist view, an enlightenment idea, and how Sauron, has this diverse army from around Middle Earth that he gathers, fighting against these, old white kings and wizards. Their army's pretty bland in comparison. So it's an interesting idea. I've always I was disappointed in Avatar, its message when it came to technology. It was the whole, romanticizing the nature and mysticism versus the evils of the science and technology. And I thought it would have been so great, if you flip that story to, especially because you get into a bit of a plot hole of, if you want to put your nerd glasses on and be like, why would they want to travel to get the unobtainium, and why is it so important to their economy, and is it worth going there, and it would be so much simpler if the humans were the true believers who wanted these rocks, this unobtainium, just for mystical reasons. We want your magic rocks because we make, mystical crystal jewelry out of them, and, and that the people of the planet, the Navi, wanted to protect their planet and nature because they understood scientifically the, curiosities of their planet. And so I think that would have been, that's how I would have made it, where these people are coming and destroying what they don't understand for mystical reasons, and have the scientists be the ones that are like, well, no, there's interesting stuff going on here, and we need to protect it because they have an understanding of it. So I think it's interesting to flip concepts like that. One of the flips that I don't like because when I talk about Harry Potter often as being, sort of a pro-skeptical story, people always say, like, have you read the online, I think it's Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality? And I haven't read it, but to me, it kind of goes against my point of, you can have a story that is based in a fantasy world, which is appealing as, to entertain people. And the messages can still promote science thinkers. You buy into the concept of, this is how it's a magical world. You buy into that. And Harry Potter doesn't have to, like in this fan fiction, he, is investigating the magic. And you don't have to do that. You can buy into the physics of the Harry Potter universe, but the characters in the real Harry Potter still operate in a skeptical manner. They still act and learn critical thinking lessons in the fantasy world. So it kind of goes against my whole point when you flip it and you have Harry Potter being very literally skeptical of the magic. It kind of falls apart as this beautiful example that the real Harry Potter is of using fantasy, which who would think that a story about little kids learning magic and being witches and wizards could promote, scientific ways of thinking. I mean, the first book is a giant lesson on, not giving into your biases about people and making, they make huge assumptions about what's going on and they're proven wrong. And so I think that can happen in fantasy, without having to be so literally skeptical, about the magic.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We'll say thanks again to the panel, to Sara and Jeff.
Thank you.